don't assume they don't have any money. Don't assume that things aren't as important to them as they are to a business. I mean, in many ways, they run like a business. Obviously, it's going to differ based on the organizational size and their mission and who their audience is. But I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to work with nonprofits. They don't have any money, right? Like, well, I'm living proof that they have some money.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hello, friend. Welcome into another episode of the Web Design Business Podcast. When I say web design and nonprofits in the same sentence, how does that make you feel? For me personally, there are some mixed feelings and some red flags because I have had some amazing nonprofit clients in my day. I've also had some of the worst client experiences I've ever had who were nonprofits. However, regardless of that, this could happen in any industry, by the way, but nonprofits just bring a different set of, I guess we'll call them challenges or different deliverables and just different client situations, communication situations, all of the above for web designers. However, there are huge opportunities for web design for nonprofits. So much so, I honestly had no idea how much opportunity there are for web designers to help nonprofits. You could actually make an entire web design career out of doing nothing but nonprofit websites if you wanted to. And I want to share this with you for this talk. There is no one better in the industry to talk to about this than Andrea Shirey of 19 Design, who specifically builds websites for mostly nonprofits. She serves small businesses as well, but the primary client base that she has are nonprofits. And man, she has got like a wealth of knowledge on how to work with nonprofits, what to expect when you're a web designer working with them, how to price yourself when you're dealing with an organization who is a nonprofit, but also if you're of the mindset that nonprofits don't have money, think again, because nonprofits sometimes have way more money to spend on a website and in marketing than some small businesses do. So all that to say, there are so many opportunities for you to work with nonprofits. Also, let's be real about this. Nonprofits often have amazing missions and passions. Like some of my favorite clients were nonprofits because they were very purpose-driven and passion-driven, and some of their stories and mission behind what they did was like amazing, like life-changing and life-giving missions and impact that they were making. So it's an honor to be a part of that as a web designer. So all that and more we're going to cover in this one. What a great conversation. Man, I'm excited to bring Andrea on here. Now, Andrea also has kind of a secondary superpower, and that is accessibility, which makes sense depending on the type of nonprofits you're working with. So on that note, she actually has a website accessibility essentials course specifically for web designers. And as a listener of this show, she has a special gift for you, including that course and some other free resources. You can go to 19design.net/Josh. And there's going to be some resources there and a special offer for her accessibility course for web designers. So I highly recommend checking that out after this interview. Again, that is at 19design.net/Josh. Go check that out. And again, without further ado, here's Andrea. We're going to dive into nonprofits and the amazing opportunity for you as web designers that you can do with nonprofits. But you need to be prepared to work with nonprofits. So that's exactly what we're going to get into. Let's dive in, shall we? Here's Andrea. All right. Well, Andrea, welcome on to the podcast. You have the Christmas tree behind you, looking festive. That already gets me in a good mood. So I think we're going to have a good chat. Thank you so much thank you for taking some time to chat today.
Of course. I'm happy to be here. I'm a regular podcast listener, so it's kind of nice to be on the other side of the table here today.
Well, thank you so much for joining. You have kind of an interesting, I guess you're in an interesting part of the market as a web designer and as an educator, because you work with both small businesses and nonprofits. And you're very clear about that. On your website, as of now, it even says I work with nonprofits and small businesses. I did work with nonprofits, but I did not advertise that necessarily. I'm sure like many other web designers, I've had some nonprofits that were really cool and I had some nightmare nonprofit experiences. So I'm really excited to pick your brain on that. And of course you have some skill set and insight on accessibility as well. So I'd love to dive into all that, but I'd really like to start out with why nonprofit? Why have you made nonprofit forefront in your copy and in your messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you ask anybody, we all have a range of some of my best experiences in 7 years of business have been with nonprofit clients. I've seen some of the best outcomes. And it's also been the thing that's almost told me to like, I think I'm going to burn this thing to the ground and start over. So, it's an easy answer because I'm a former nonprofit executive director. And so the bulk of my career has been in the nonprofit world. My very first job out of college, was the director of the annual fund at my alma mater, West Virginia University Foundation. I was running the telemarketing program that got me into the fundraising world, which I didn't know anything about. I have a marketing degree, business degree, and but that kind of just led me, to the next job, and those have spanned from being an executive director of a United Way affiliate here in the Mid Ohio Valley area, but I've also worked at the university level doing corporate fundraising. Obviously, I've been on boards as a board of director. And so I have this big range of experience with nonprofits. And when I decided that I was kind of done with that phase of my career, and actually the whole reason I started this business, and go into make a long story short, but I was in my role as helping nonprofits learn how to fundraise online. I heard over and over and over again, well, we don't have access to our website, or we don't know how to update our website, or so-and-so firm did it and they went out of business and we've never been able to log in. I mean, I heard it all and I was so frustrated because they just needed the tools to raise money online to get their message out to their audience. And they literally were running up on these barriers. And so when I decided to step out of the workforce full time and was kind of toying around with starting my own business, I thought, I think I can build websites for nonprofits in a way that really works well for them. I had the design skills. I spoke the language, but I wanted to empower them to update their own sites, to have control, to learn about the process. What the heck is website hosting? Like, I teach my clients that stuff. I'm not your typical, what I kind of say on my, and no offense to the male audience, I'm not like a tech bro firm that it's like, oh, you can't touch any of this because you're going to break it. I go the opposite route. I spend a lot of time making sure that my client knows what a host is, what a domain is, why it matters, where you buy your domain. And so long story short, that's why nonprofits, because that's where all my experience was. But then I realized, hey, I'm also a small business owner. And and I have obviously corporate work experience. And so I wasn't sure if the market would dictate, if I would have enough work, frankly, just to do nonprofits.
Yeah.
And then as you get known in your local community, in your regions, you have, I had a friend that has a small business and said, well, I need a new website. And I was like, well, I can do that, and so I serve both audiences and I like it because they bring different things to the table and they bring, it is really a different experience depending which one I'm working with.
Well, it makes a whole lot of sense with your background. So that lays the perfect foundation for why you would really highlight nonprofits, because I'm sure you do. I mean, you literally have an insider's perspective,
right?
As far as what their needs are, what the main challenges are. So everything you said right there, that could be a homepage with laying out the challenges, the needs, and how, your experience and why you're the person to choose, apart from somebody like myself who would be like, I could build your website, but I've never been in a nonprofit. I don't know how that works. So that makes a ton of sense. And to your point with the small businesses, I think anyone thinking about niching down, particularly with nonprofits, who are in nonprofits? Usually business owners or professionals.
A lot of them,
like
right?
a lot of times that's a part of they might run a business and then they are part of a nonprofit. So that's really, really cool. It makes sense that you would do the both ends of things. What is the difference? You mentioned there's a suite of maybe challenges or differences between the two. I guess, what are some of the differences web designers should be prepared for when working with a nonprofit versus a small business?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've had a lot of fellow designers reach out to me and say, hey, I have this lead from a nonprofit, but, what do I talk to them differently? What I say, and one of the biggest things that I don't do proposals a whole lot. I'm very lucky at this point in my business that a lot of people come to me and they just want to work with me, and I don't have to kind of pitch myself. But at the time where I did, if you're going to, pitch yourself to a nonprofit, who's looking for a new website or website redesign, first of all, let's not just say you can help them make money and get more clients, right? You need to speak their language. They're looking at appealing to donors, right? We don't really, they do have program clients, but really their website, and that's one of the biggest differences at the same time between the businesses and the nonprofits is if you're a small business, typically you have a pretty tight idea of who your audience is, what your demographic looks like, what they like to do, where they spend their money. A nonprofit's got to appeal to a lot of different audiences on the same website, and it's got to flow. Right. So you might have volunteers coming to look to see, is this a place I want to give my time? You may have a potential donor, individual donor saying, is this where I'm going to make my gift this year? You may have a corporation who's looking, you're asking them to make a corporate gift, and they're coming on your website saying, well, why would I give to them at a corporate level? Or a foundation, you've applied for a grant. Is that grant funder going to come and find the data and the outcomes that you've talked about in your grant application? So your website as a nonprofit has to appeal to all these different audiences kind of seamlessly and almost on every page, because you know which page they're going to land on. You can't just have a donor page expect that they're not going to go to the volunteer page. So
good point.
And
that differentiation that you mentioned between the call to action for a nonprofit versus a small business, you're totally right. I would imagine you should probably, anyone who's doing both, I would think that you'd want like a nonprofit web design page, ideally, because you could speak the language of like not boost revenue, but boost donations, get volunteers, join the cause versus grow your business.
Yes.
Like that.
Welcome to my struggle for the last 7 years, because if you go to my website, I am constantly trying to find that line of, I always say businesses and organizations, and I have struggled, I'll just be honest, as a website designer, should I have two different businesses? But I have such brand recognition.
Yeah. I would just have a page. If I could give you any coaching advice, I would have websites for nonprofits, websites for small businesses, because they do have special needs. And I imagine from an SEO perspective, I don't know how many people are capitalizing on nonprofit web design, but because there is really a difference in the needs and the understanding of that, especially with your background, I would think that would be the way to go. You could, your services are your services, but they are catered differently, and the way you sell them would be. It's just
that tricky duplicate content thing with Google, because a lot of the things you want to say on a website services page, like you need to tell them about the process, right? And so trust me, I have like 6 drafts behind the scenes of like how to break, and I'm very lucky in that I typically don't have a lot of downtime between clients, so it hasn't been a priority. Yeah. But I would encourage somebody, if they're looking at this, I think you're absolutely right, because you really are selling your services in a different way, and you're offering something different to each of them.
And I was just thinking, you're at a different point because you are getting so many organic referrals, and it doesn't seem like it's really a problem. Like if you got to a point where you're like, okay, this is a huge problem, everyone's confused, then I would say for sure, let's make a split here. But you're right. The duplicate content thing can be tricky from an SEO perspective. But one strategy that I would think about with this, not only for you, Andrea, but just for everyone who has like a couple different niches, is the landing page for like nonprofit web design versus small business web design. You could almost have a page that's almost just the verbiage and just the different challenges, but those could then lead to website design services, and that's its own page.
Yeah,
or the process. That's its own page. So under web design could almost be like 4 items. That's like nonprofit web design, small business, our services, and then like process.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Just for anyone who is in this bucket, because I've coached a lot of people who do serve 2 different niches or nonprofits, and yeah, you're right. There is just a big difference. And
you just have to speak to them. And I think that's one of the selling points that I've always been able to make when I, get a nonprofit leader on the phone is like, listen, I've been at your desk. I know that you're balancing 100 things today. The website's the bottom of the list, but I also know you probably can't tell me off the top of your head, how much money you raised online this past, in the past quarter. And they're like, oh, we have no idea. And, I teach them how to, first of all, how to get the website in place so we can get the online donations, but then also how to maintain that and carry that through. I'm not having those kind of conversations with businesses. I mean, we're talking about conversions, but it's in a whole different way. So yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest differences. The other one, of course, is working with boards. I've been a board member. I'm a current board member. Obviously, I've led a board of directors. They love to dictate design, even though they don't understand they're not the primary audience. And so that's always a challenge. We have a group of people involved. I talk a lot in my discovery calls. I talk a lot about single decision makers. You can have all the committees you want, but I need one person to come back to me. That's a hard boundary for me. And ask me why I've learned that lesson, right? Early on. And then helping them understand the connection. I feel like businesses understand like, oh yeah, people need to go to our website to either find our physical business, buy online, find out when we're open. That business kind of get that, like the function part of the website. A lot of nonprofits, in my experience, are looking at it like this pretty brochure. And so that's a difference I see between the two, is really educating them, helping them understand the connection between their website, their social media, their fundraising efforts, their other, traditional marketing, kind of help them see that all as like, it's really one package, and they're coming at, these audiences from different angles. So, yeah.
That makes sense. You mentioned the board thing. I was going to say my experience working with nonprofits, the major issue and the major thing that led to a lot of the nightmare situations for me was the board thing. And that's what I teach a lot of my students. Like, I would never say don't work with nonprofits, but just heads up, the experience of setting boundaries is going to be different with a small business rather than a board, because like you mentioned, the decision making is the tricky thing. So to your point, you already hit the most important point, which is one decision maker.
Right. And I coach my clients, because normally it's the nonprofit director that's making the call, that's, vetting folks. And I coach them on like, I think sometimes we just have to equip them to go back to the board. I'm like, here's the language you can use with the board. We absolutely want your input. Here are the times that you're going to have input. But here are the times that we're going to focus on, maybe do a focus group of our donors instead. Or remember, we're trying to appeal to a corporate audience, and you already know and love us. You're not really our audience. Board members just don't think like that. Sometimes they just need somebody to remind them, that it doesn't matter if this box is blue or black or, purple. It's, what's going to translate from somebody going to read the message and hit the donate button. And so I coach those executive directors a lot on how to talk to their boards about that.
And how do you help with the hierarchy thing? Because this is where it could get tricky. And I remember this well, because I remember I did a website for a small business, and it was a gal in my networking group for her business, and her dad had just joined a nonprofit and they needed a website. So she got me in touch with him, and he got me in touch with them, and they signed on for a decent sized website that wasn't terribly intricate. The problem was, though, I kind of thought that he was going to be my primary contact, but he was brand new. So he really didn't have any say for the board as much. And I remember I was like an hour away. They asked to do a meeting to review the website and stuff. And I went there, and it was one of those where it was like, why did you call me and make me drive an hour? Like, you guys need to have this conversation first before you come to me, because I was just sitting there listening to them bitch and bicker and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, why? That was one of those where I so vividly remember doing that. And I was like, okay, moving forward, I'm going to get not only one point of contact, but make it clear who the decision maker is. That's a difference too, right? Who's the decision maker? Who's the primary contact?
Yeah. I very rarely do I work with anyone directly on a board of directors. To me, and from my experience of sitting in that position and then just working with them for the past 7 years, the board, they've got the fiduciary responsibility. Those conversations are around what does our budget allow for this project? What kind of timing are we looking at? How does this tie into our greater vision as an organization? Once the designers been hired and engaged and there's a contract signed, the board really shouldn't have anything to do with the project. If the executive director wants to go to like the marketing committee or the fundraising committee and get input on language or different initiatives that they want to showcase, that can all be done during the client homework phase. But once that client homework comes to me, I expect a plan for them that says, these are the 4 programs we're highlighting. Here is the rough copy for the online giving page. And what they do outside of like in the approval process, once I send them a draft, that's up to them. Like if they want to take it to the board and hash it out and all that kind of stuff, but I need that ED to come back to me and say, okay, here's where we are going forward. And it is, again, it's a little bit easier. The longer you're in business, the harder you can, really hold to those boundaries. I can be a little more forceful, kind, but, just kind of like strong
assertive
in my convictions of like, listen, and I always say like, I'm doing this because I've worked with people who don't do this. This is going to be easier on you. I've seen it work the other way. And again, just giving them language, because a lot of times maybe they're intimidated by their board or they just like don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. So I'm like, okay, you can phrase it this way. So that's how I handle it.
With a primary contact, do you, in that case, if they weren't the decision maker, would you just say, like, this is what you need to do, you need to get approval on this, and then come back to me once a decision is made? Is that kind of how to handle that?
Yeah, pretty much. I've done a handful of like calls with like maybe a member of the board and like the market, if it was a larger nonprofit, maybe their marketing person or, their community outreach person. But for the most part, I try to stay out of all that and remind them that their board also shouldn't be in the weeds. That's not the role of a board of director. The board of directors role is a fiduciary oversight role. And like I said, once it makes it to the budget and a contract's been signed, their input's welcome, right? In that initial questionnaire I give them, I'm happy to have as much, feedback. But as long as they understand, hey, I'm not the primary audience here. I'm already a fan, right? I'm already engaged. We're trying to reach out to new people who don't know about us.
Yeah.
And try to find a role for them, right? Sometimes you can throw them a bone. Like I love to do an internal board portal page on my nonprofit website so that I can get EDs to stop emailing documents all over the place and board members saying they didn't get the email. We create a board portal, put a password on it. That's where they post the agendas and the minutes and upcoming meetings. So we get the board all up involved in that. They can make that page look whatever they want. And so they feel like they have this big role in it.
Beautiful.
But it's really limited to like this page that the public really never sees.
That's beautiful.
Balance.
Do you find like, okay, so I had some nonprofits who were awesome. They were like, they paid me well. They didn't scoff at the price. And then probably not a shocker, I had some that basically expected like a $10,000 website for free. In fact, I had one meeting one time where I went out with a friend of a friend, basically, who I had done website for. And he's like, hey, I have a friend who's in a nonprofit and he wants to ask you about doing their website. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I'd love to meet with him. So we met up and it was very awkward. He kind of got awkward and he was like, because he told me about the scope of the project, what they're looking to do. And he's like, I did want to let you know, this is something we are looking to do to have you do pro bono, but you'll get a tax write-off and everything. And I was just like, I don't very easily get offended. And I wasn't offended as much as like, are you freaking kidding me, dude? Like, I don't even know you. It'd be one thing if I knew you and you knew I was into the mission, and not that I wasn't in the mission, but it was very off-putting for someone to be like, okay, we want you to do a ton of work and train us and all that stuff, and we're expecting you to do this pro bono. Yeah. It wasn't even like, what do you have? Do you have an offer for nonprofits? It was like straight up, we expect you to do this for free. So I had a couple drinks and left. But I want to know, like, how common is that in nonprofit world, and how do we? I guess the question is, how do we combat that? I don't know. Because
it's relevant for sure. And I always think like, would you ask your accountant for that? Would you go to your CPA and be like, could you just do all this work for free? Then you're not going to, there's something about this business that people think, that they undervalue, I feel like a little bit. So I do a couple of things. And I know it's controversial, and you could find 10 people on each side in an hour Google search of, do you put pricing on your website or not? I do. I keep it as a range so people know what the bottom is, and that it goes up from there. I'm very clear at the inquiry, part of the inquiry process, where I say, this is the bottom price, no matter how big the site is, and then it increases, based on XYZ factors. So I lead with that. So if you go to my website as a potential client, nowhere are you going to assume that maybe I might do your website for free. If somebody comes to me, if they go ahead and fill out the form, and in my inquiry form, you have to basically hit the drop down of like, here's the package I'm interested in. And, I'm assuming I think there's even a little link there back to the prices of those packages. So I'm making sure they see that, because I don't want to waste their time and I don't want to waste my time. If they come through that and then in the call, they're like, well, it's really above our budget, that kind of thing. I have started, and again, this is 7 years into business. I think if you're year 1, year 2, it might be a little bit different. You may decide, you want to build that experience and lower your prices or rethink the package to make it more affordable. But I started giving resources on how to find grants to fund your website design. I think you just had somebody on the podcast. I haven't listened to it yet, but I saw it in my feed. So I created a pretty in-depth blog post around that. And I give that to people as a resource and say, I understand you really want it right now. Maybe, take this advice, go and see if you can get a grant to fund this. I've had lots of clients that have come back to me and go like, I got a check from XYZ Foundation. We're ready to go. And I give them the tools to write that grant request in a way that, that they probably wouldn't otherwise. Like from my lens of here's the case you're going to make about outcomes. Here's what we're going to be able to do with our website. Here's what it's going to feature. Here's why you can't do this right now. All those things that I know, again, because I've been in the industry, I know what grant funders are looking for.
I was going to say, as a nonprofit, I wondered if that was going to come up. So I just found your blog post. I'm going to make sure we link that because this is great. Which, you're right. At the time of recording this with you, this week is when Julia Taylor's episode came out about grant funding. And one aspect of that I don't want web designers to miss is you could get it for your business for sure, but yes, get it for your clients, like empower them to go for a grant if they can't afford your $5,000 or $10,000 package, and they just might be able to. So what a great resource. 7 best practices to successfully write a grant proposal. I'll make sure we link this in there because this could be super valuable. I love that.
If it's a nonprofit, I think has some ability and some time, I may also recommend a template. I have a lot of friends that sell website templates. And so I may recommend you could go and grab this template that's got a pretty good outline for a nonprofit. And maybe then they contract with me for copywriting, and then I review it before they launch it, right? So they can't afford to work with me as a whole. I can kind of piece out some of those services. I've had a handful do that, but in my experience, and the whole reason I have a template shop, it is not include website templates, because I know these nonprofit directors, at least the many hundreds that I've worked with and they're on my email list, they don't have time to do their own website. That's why they want to hire somebody. They have way too much on their plate. So the template approach is not right for a lot of them. But if it's a bigger organization, maybe has somebody on staff that could take a template and run with it, they could contract with me for a few of those services.
Okay. Gotcha. Very cool. One thing I'd love to talk about is the fact that nonprofits, some of them do have really healthy budgets. And I actually, when I got into web design, when I actually first got into WordPress, I ended up getting a really good nonprofit client that something happened with their web developer and he moved on, but they had a site that was pretty legit. And they just hired me to basically be the webmaster and do updates. And in the early days, it was really cool. It was like $400 a month, which when I was getting started, it was like, hell yeah, I can update some about pages and staff and some numbers. And that was awesome. It was a great little retainer. So some nonprofits, I just want to make sure everyone knows, like, nonprofits are not all like cheap type of group of people who have no money. Like, some of them really do have some funding behind them.
Absolutely. I mean, I can think of 3-4 clients that I've had this year that have been, $10,000 websites from nonprofits. I mean, they are, if they're managing their money well, right, and they're looking at this as an investment and they have a decent sized staff or budget, they understand, right? That this is an investment. This is something that's going to, and I can make the case really quick in a discovery call that the investment of your website is going to come back to you tenfold. I mean, 9 times out of 10, they're going to make that money back in a quarter or 2 quarters through online giving. And
I was
you just need
wondering,
to reframe it.
do you highlight donation, like results for donation and almost case studies for some of your
I should.
Was that touchy? Because I'm
A
sure that
good
could be
website
touchy.
design owner would do that. I have and I'm sure most of your audience does, or you might like this list of blog post topics a mile long that I want to write that I just never seem to get the time to sit down and write. But I would love to, because I had a client this year in the first quarter. I think we launched their site in March. By June, they had secured a $10,000 corporate donation, unsolicited. The corporation was local to them, found that they had money that they had to give through their annual pot. They found their website online through a Google search because we had excellent SEO. We had a whole page dedicated to corporate support, and that corporation reached out to them and said, "Hey, we'd like to give you $10,000. This is something you could use." And they called me. I was like the second call. They called their board president, and then they called me, and we're like, "Oh my God." So that was so fun because you tell them in the process, but then it actually happens. And
Andrea, why is that not on your website? That should be like homepage, front center, before the details, nonprofit. Because that's it. Like even just that, for anyone who is thinking about like, how do I do case studies and stuff? It could be as simple as that, which I'm reminding myself of that too with some of my student results.
I need to take notes. I know.
Really, that right there, like, because you just articulated where they were at, what you did, the main aspects that help in detail, and then the results. Like they had a huge investment. And the reason I think for nonprofits too, even perhaps more so, might get a quicker return is because they're not selling like a service or something. They're really, a lot of it is probably just awareness and just better conversion tactics versus like a service or something when it comes to as a donation, because a donation doesn't have any fulfillment behind it. Right. Whereas if you sell a service as a small business, that's going to, sales are awesome, but it puts stress on a team, a system, whatever, hours, whatever. So oh my gosh, I would do that.
I know. I'm like, I don't have that out there. I mean, I've talked about that with my audience, my email list and things throughout the year. But I think when I look at these generic, template, and everyone's selling website templates, and I get it's a lucrative business. I think it's a great idea for a lot of designers. I don't know that I've ever seen a nonprofit template that has a corporate gifts section. And that's a big missed opportunity. So if you're listening and you sell templates and you're marketing to nonprofits, I absolutely recommend that you have a corporate giving page. Because even if you don't have an official corporate giving program, you can still appeal. You're asking corporate sponsors, I'm sure, for event sponsorships, gifts throughout the year. So, showcase a couple of your current corporate donors, talk about how you steward your corporate donors, how, maybe you can, I always recommend nonprofits like offer them a tour behind the scenes. Here's how our nonprofit operates. And then give them an easy way to give online. That's the quickest way to make your return on investment back from a website project.
Are corporations seeking those out to like get numbers off the books for charity and, for philanthropy and stuff? Like, is that pretty common?
I know in our region, and I'm not too far geographically from you, but in our region, we have a couple of corporations who they have an entire staff person dedicated to community outreach, public relations, and those people have to be taking opportunities back to their teams, right? So I think they'd be crazy not to be searching what those opportunities are, and that's just where the visibility comes through. That's where we can encourage them to use their social media to get the buzz, but then draw them back into those corporate pages. Even if they're not proactively seeking them out, if you're going to approach a company, say for an event sponsorship, and you can drop that link to your corporate giving page on your website, I'm going to be impressed if I'm a corporate, outreach staff member, and I see that, I'm like, oh wow, these people really have their stuff together.
See, this conversation is now making me contradict myself, because after everything we've talked about, even to this point, I'm like, This could be its own site now, because now you could have like nonprofit case studies that are all SEO. You could have the corporate giving page. You could have all this segmented out. But this is great stuff, because these are things that I don't really know of and hadn't thought of, just because I've never been in that world. Did some great work and met some awesome people in nonprofits, but a lot of this, as far as like the results, again, just to reframe and highlight the importance of that, results are different for small businesses versus nonprofits. So anytime you can showcase real results, real numbers and donations, I mean, that's amazing. That's awesome. One thing I did find that was challenging, the biggest challenge was the boards, for sure. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I found challenging was turnover and churn with some of the members. Like I remember, actually it was that same one. No, it was a couple. There was another one that I did a website for, and the guy was awesome. He was kind of like their tech guy. He did all their domains and email, and he could do websites, but it was kind of one of those things where he was just flying by the seat of his pants, trying to figure it out. He was a joy to work with. He was awesome. Tom, I remember Tom. He left. Like after the website was done, and a year after it had been done, he stepped out of the organization. And I mean, the people who were like, I set the training, I did the videos, I did the custom dashboard, just like you do, had all these things, but it ended up being a bit of a nightmare, because they had people come in and out and in and out, and I had a really hard time like keeping up training them. And then it became pretty time intensive. How do you combat that? Is it just to do as good as the job as you can with training resources? I mean, I guess you have to expect that too.
Yeah, I think part of it is the expectation. So I do not offer, as a public service, I do not offer maintenance, hosting packages, all this kind of stuff. I understand that's lucrative and it's recommended. That has not been my business model. And I'm kind of my personality is that I like to go all in on a project, and then I want to like wipe my hands and I want to move on. I just want to like cut that tie. I'm not like a long-term project gal for the most part. I do have a handful of like favorites, if they're listening. Hi guys, that get my maintenance services and pay me well for that.
Ask, what do you do with those? Because I have some recommendations, but if you have some, awesome.
Yeah, I have a handful of them because I love them so much. A lot of them are business clients, either that I use their services. I was a client first and then did the website. Okay. I love to write, and so I do copywriting for handful of clients on an ongoing basis, but there are services like a yoga studio that I go to all the time, a fitness program that I'm a part of. So who better to write your website content than the person who participates in your program every week, right? So I have a handful of those. But to answer your question, one of it is going into the expectation that I offer, my basic nonprofit package offers 4 weeks of sort of offboarding support. So you can Vox me, you have access to my inbox, I'm going to respond promptly, those kind of things. And hopefully within those 4 weeks, we can kind of resolve all the like, oh no, we forgot this or we forgot that. And I kind of just build that into my pricing. After 4 weeks, I send an email that basically says your 4 weeks of support are over. However, here's my hourly rate. Here's a link to my calendar so you can book an hour with me to solve a problem, which tells you right that if you click on that link, it's going to cost you, right? You're not getting free support. And then, like you said, I do give them a lot of tools to documentation. And I have a template shop for nonprofits. It's actually a template library. Just one fee, you get the entire library and you get everything that's added to the library as it grows. And one of the templates in there is documentation for like a documentation manual for your website and your email. So it's a place that you write all of your domain names, your passwords, your account information. I give them instructions on how to share it with a board member. It's part of their process when boards rotate off and you get a new board member on. If it's that particular committee that holds this information, that's on a checklist for you. So I try really hard to kind of hone in on that like succession planning, basically. I also build all my websites on Squarespace. And so the easiest thing for me to do, and I've got it saved as a Gmail email template, is to send them over to the Squarespace knowledge base, where they can get all unlimited support. They're already paying with that for their hosting, with their hosting package. So that's an easy kind of like, hey, here, I think you'll find what you need here. And then if they come
Yeah.
back to me, they're getting that link to book to book an hour slot or something.
That also makes
Not
sense.
perfect, but
That's a great setup. It makes sense too why maintenance and hosting isn't as a priority for you using Squarespace since
Right.
it's self-hosted. And there's still a lot for anyone who's curious. You can still do ongoing support and care for Squarespace for sure, but it's usually more content, additions, optimization, thing like that. Accessibility. Speaking of accessibility, I knew we were going to segue here because nonprofits in particular are probably by nature the forefront of accessibility. I would say, well, that may not be fair. I mean, I'm sure every corporate business, obviously there's a ton of needs, but the reason I think about that is because like I'll call them the bitching board example. When I was there and they were wasting my time, they were a really cool nonprofit for the disabled.
Oh.
And I didn't even, back then that was probably, that must have been 2016 maybe. Accessibility wasn't even a word in web design back then, or at least if it was, I hadn't seen anything about it. Very, very different now, especially for that type of site where they're working with disabled people of all variety. So how I would imagine that accessibility, if you take accessibility seriously, you could probably that would be an upsell for nonprofits, I would imagine, right? Like a skill set or
some people are looking at it that way. For me, I've decided to build it into all of my packages. And I mean, I think depending on where you are in your business, year 7, I can have some hard boundaries. Somebody said the other day in a Slack group that I was in, he said, it's easier to design an accessible website than it is to make a client care about accessibility. And I was like, oh boy, you hit the nail on the head, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, that doesn't matter. And I'm like, hey, hang on, hang on, And so I talk about it from day one. Obviously, it's on my website. It's a part of every you click on the package, you see that your site's going to meet the current criteria, whatever the current criteria is. I spent a lot of money and time late 2022 and early this year to complete my certification. Because someone in my family that I love very much was having trouble navigating a website. And it just sparked something in me that I thought, if I'm going to put digital content into the world, I should make sure that every single person can access it. And as I thought, well, I'm just going to do some research. Maybe I can find a class or something. I took one class and I was like, oh man, I'm all in. It was so profound that I wanted to be a part of the solution. And I don't say that from some big, lofty goals kind of thing. But, 1 in 4 people have some kind of challenge. And the biggest way my eyes were opened is that, yes, it's certainly important for a nonprofit that's serving, a disabled community. But 1 in 4 people have some sort of challenge. And a lot of times it's a challenge you can't even see. It's a cognitive challenge where if there's too much text on the page, their brain is not computing that information and they're not going to make their way to that call to action button at all. So you're missing them completely. Or if they land on your site and they have some sort of vision impairment and your color contrast, this whole trend of these minimal websites that are a tan background with white text. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's
they're everywhere. And I'm like, okay, we can be elegant without, and still make it readable. So I got super passionate. I took one class, then I took another class, and then I took a course, which took me, a couple months, and it was a big financial investment.
What was the accessibility course that you went through?
It's through DQ University. It's DEQUE, DQ University. And so they have a web accessibility course. And then if you complete, you can go through their curriculum package, and then you can qualify to take the accessibility exam. Which is the IIAP certification.
Okay, and that is DEQUE, not DQ like ice cream.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I kind of got really passionate about it. I kind of got obsessed with it. I went back to all my former clients and started talking to them. And I was really honest with them. And I said, I didn't consider this the way I should have. I offered them a very, very, very generous offer to go back and bring their sites up to the current accessibility criteria. And many of them had me do that. I met with folks in my community that use screen assistive devices, talk with them about their challenges. If you've never tried to navigate a website without a keyboard or a mouse, I highly recommend that you try it. It will give you a whole new appreciation for how you design a site.
It's a great test.
Yeah. And then eventually I started talking to enough designers about this. They said, okay, can you teach us? And so I put together, and the thing about it is you start Googling this stuff and it's overwhelming. There's so much information.
Oh, accessibility is one that is, I mean, I'm a web design coach and I've really tried to stay on the pulse. And it's like last year I went on this deep dive into accessibility, and I was daunted after learning.
Your eyes started glazing.
I also didn't know how polarized the industry is with overlay options versus like on-site stuff. And it was, I was like, good Lordy, I accidentally got into the arguments between those two communities because I had somebody from Accessibility on, and then I had somebody who hates Accessibility. So I was like, oh man, what did I get myself into? Yeah.
The widgets, the widgets that are out there, I won't name them because I'm still a little bit scared of getting sued, but in talking with the disabled community, at least here in my community, they hate them, right? Those widgets interfere with the technology they're already using. And I, personally, just in my opinion, I think it's a little bit of a cop out as a designer of like, hey, I'm going to make it look however I want to look, and I'm going to slap this widget on and call it accessible. I'm in the camp of like, let's do the work up front. Let's design it in a way that's responsible for this community, that makes sure everybody can use it. It really renders the widgets like you don't need them. And so I put together an essentials course for other designers so that I could kind of speak a basic language, get them the information I felt that would make the biggest impact, but without the major financial investment that I put into it, right? And then I created a dynamic Notion checklist that they could use. So when they're working on a project, they can pull up the checklist. They can kind of run down through each of the categories. Like, did I get the color contrast? Did I get the alt text? And then some things maybe that they may have not thought of. I mean, heading structure is the biggest sin that I see of, pages that just have heading structures all over the place. They're not in hierarchical order. That's a nightmare for screen reader users. And so that's been really successful. I mean, designers have really embraced it. They've loved it. It does take a little bit of time, and you can go through it, and I've had students kind of go through it and, binge it in a day. And some people kind of like stretch it out over the week. But I wanted to kind of make it more, no pun intended, accessible for designers who don't have the time to deep dive in and want to stay out of like all the things that you said that you got into it. But okay, I should know the basics here. If this is my job, if I'm putting digital content into the world, let's make sure that everybody has equal access to see it.
And that's what is cool. Like the basics are pretty common sense, really, with color contrast, alt text on images, the basic things that are going to make, a website literally like seen and visible for everybody. Even just design, flow, menu, navigation structure, all those things that are really just good website design best practices.
Yeah, they're great for SEO too. I think that's what a lot of people miss. I mean, they're like, well, I'm not really interested in, or that's fine. We don't have to worry about that. I was like, okay, well, Google cares about these things too. And there are some obvious ones like the color contrast and the headers. But there are a lot of sites I see with a lot of animations, a lot of autoplay videos that are very detrimental to people who, if you think about it, if someone's using an assistive device, a screen reader, they need them to read what's on the screen. So if your video starts playing, they can't hear what's being read on the screen because your video is playing over top of that, right?
Oh, with like audio.
And so just having the video controls be accessible, or a lot of people packing websites with code to do cool stuff and not understanding how the code might impact the site's accessibility. One of the biggest takeaway people say is like, I was never testing this before I launched a site. Even if you might be nailing it all, but if you're not running it through a site checker before you launch, that's like one of the easiest things you can do that doesn't cost you anything. There are lots of free checkers out there. So, And Squarespace kind of gets a bad rep for a couple of these accessibility errors, and so I've done quite a bit of work with them to help other Squarespace designers with specific code fixes, ARIA labels, those kind of things to get around platform issues that they haven't quite addressed yet.
I think there's quite a few platforms that are catching up to all that. I'm a WordPress guy, which is kind of on the forefront of accessibility, but I'm also a Divi guy, which is the builder I use on top of WordPress. And almost all builders I'm aware of are like fixing things and trying to stay up and up on accessibility with the core of the code and the product they create. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially like I said, it's super important accessibility wise for all websites. And in the case of a lot of nonprofits, I don't know, would that help donations if that's something that they are proactively working on? Or
I think so. Well, one, if you're missing 1 in 4 people on your website and one of those has the ability to make a gift to you, but they can't get past your accessibility errors, then, right? So that's a potential donation you've left on the table. 2, if you're applying for grant funding or again, corporate gifts, and they want to know that you're doing responsible work and that you're making your services and your information accessible to everyone. And that's like a corporate value for them. If they land on your website and they see that accessibility, I always do in the footer a commitment to accessibility links over to an accessibility statement that talks about the measures that they've taken. I give my clients a template for this. It's in the template shop. Here are all the steps that we've taken. Here are the issues that we know are known to our platform. And here are alternative ways you can get this information from us. And hey, how can we do better? Contact us. Those statements go a long way. So if I'm a corporation and that's one of my core values, and I see that it's also one of your core values, over somebody else who hasn't taken that into account, I think that makes a big difference.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Are there any other red flags for nonprofits that we've maybe haven't addressed as we get ready to wrap this up? Like we've covered a lot with what to expect, how to deal with nonprofits, some of the benefits, nonprofits versus businesses, the different challenges they face, accessibility. I'm curious if there's anything that if after we hang up, if you're like,
I'm going to think of something. Yeah. Nothing's like jumping out at me. I think maybe just reiterating, like, don't assume they don't have any money. Don't assume that things aren't as important to them as they are to a business. I mean, in many ways, they run like a business. Obviously, it's going to differ based on the organizational size and their mission and who their audience is. But, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to work with nonprofits. They don't have any money, right? Like I'm living proof that they have some money, right? If you are pitching to them in a way that's authentic and again, making that case for investment, and you can help them see it through that lens. I think the potential is there to run a thriving business just based on nonprofits. And again, the only reason I continue to work with small businesses is because I do love it. And it's a little bit of I like variety in my business life. And so I don't want to just go all in on one segment and ignore the other one. But I think it's a great niche, especially if you have some connection to it. And like I do, and you have some, or you just want to learn about it, right? And maybe you're a board member and you want to, that can be enough to give you a little bit of unique perspective.
You heard it here, folks. A lot of opportunity for nonprofits. This has been great, Andrea. You really you really enlightened me and made me feel a little bit different about nonprofits. I would say I'm more on the apprehensive side based off of my experience, but I didn't hear this conversation in time to help me through all that stuff. And I learned every lesson the hard way. So this has been really good. And it makes a lot of sense as to why there's so much opportunity for this. And I mean, nonprofits are continuing to sprout up just like businesses are. And I think the other thing to consider too, if you want to do both nonprofits and businesses, is like we mentioned, business owners are often in nonprofits. So it is like you get one nonprofit instead of one client, maybe one person, you may have been exposed to 8 people on the board and they all have their networks. They all have their businesses. It's almost like a quick way to expand your network if you work with a group of some sort.
Absolutely. I guess I've thought of that from time to time, and that's certainly been the case for me. I think it's great to highlight. Or, I see some folks going after different affiliate organizations. So I was the executive director of my local United Way. Guess how many United Way clients I've done in 6 years, or more than you would care to listen to have me list. Because once you've done a United Way website, you speak the United Way language. I've done the United Way job. There are thousands of United Ways all across the country. There are companies that cater to them that are not doing a fantastic job, in my opinion. And so finding maybe those affiliate organizations like a Habitat for Humanity. I've done many of those because I'm a local board member here in my community. Red Cross, you name it. There are all these affiliate nonprofits that can open, and you do one and then another, and then word spreads them because they're all talking to each other. So. Yeah, don't count them out.
Awesome stuff. That's such a good point. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for your time. Where should people go to connect with you and find out more? Because you have an accessibility course for web designers, right?
I do. The easiest way to do it is just to go to my website, which is 19design.net. That's 1 and 9 are spelled out, the letters. And then if you go /Josh, that has a link to the accessibility course. If you're a designer, you can save $50. There's a promo code on that page for you, for your listeners. That's probably I think that's the biggest discount I've done this year, but it's Christmas time. I'm feeling generous. So, and then, once you're on my website, you can head over to the blog. I have a lot of different articles there, a lot focused on nonprofit design and nonprofit marketing. I have a nonprofit template shop that's linked there. So, that's the best place to find me.
Awesome. We'll have all that linked in the show notes. Yeah, Andrea, thank you so much for sharing your experience on that for nonprofits and accessibility. Thank you so much for putting this page together. I'm checking it out now for all the listeners. Yeah, I mean, you really have some unique perspectives in the way of nonprofits and accessibility. So I'm sure it'll be a huge help for folks who are wanting to test the waters with this. I've found learning accessibility is largely like learning web design. You really need to find somebody who you know and like and trust to guide you through that, because I think personality can help make a daunting, confusing thing seem simpler.
Sure.
So anyone who really like this, I would definitely encourage everyone to go to 19design.net /Josh, and then there's the offer for the accessibility course. So awesome stuff. Andrea, thank you so much for your time. I have a feeling next time we chat, you'll have your own nonprofit website that is completely SEO'd, and then you can do your small business stuff on the side. If I had to guess, I wouldn't be surprised if I see that happen in the near
Thanks
future.
for the free coaching. I appreciate it. Yeah.
There we go. All right. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you.
There we have it, friends. If you had thought like me that I just don't even want to work with nonprofits after a while, I hope everything that Andrea and I covered help you with not only what to expect, but how to approach nonprofits, how to guide them through. I had a blast chatting with Andrea here, and I really hope this episode helped you out too. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And for those of you who are designers and who work with a lot of nonprofits, I would love to hear any tips that you have as well. It's really an area of web design that I have not really talked about too much as far as, or created any resources on. So I would love to hear from you if you have more tips that support and back up what Andrea has said as well, or maybe add to some things that we talked about. You can do that by leaving a comment on the show notes for this episode, which you'll find at joshhall.co/311. For this episode, I do read all of those, and I will do my best to respond to you and check that out. So leave us a comment, joshhall.co/311. If you got a lot from this and you've had any mind-blowing moments or some takeaways, feel free to leave a comment there as well, because I'll make sure Andrea checks those out and she'll probably respond to you as well if you have any questions for her. And again, Andrea has a course for accessibility for web designers, kind of a crash course on it. Go to 19design.net/Josh, and she's got the offer there for you, which is going to give you a little discount on that course, along with some other resources to connect with her and some free resources as well. Well, my friends, cheers to your nonprofit web designing ways. I really hope this helps you. Gosh, I wish I would have heard this conversation, especially when I had some bad experiences, which I know I'm not alone in that, but man, the good ones outweighed the bad, I would say. It may have been 50-50, but because I didn't have this episode, but you do, so you're welcome. All right, friends, 19design.net /Josh for your special deal on that course that Andrea has for you. And I will see you, friends, on the next one. Make sure you're subscribed so you get the next episode. Got some more doozies up ahead. Man, do we have some doozies up ahead. Okay, I'll leave you with that. Cheers. See you on the next one.